Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a map analysis video. This is the first time I'm taking a look at Valve map, so it's finally time for that. We're going to be taking a look at Ancient, which is part of the Broken Fang operation. It's a very fresh map, very new map, but it plays like a map from 2015. I'm going to go into that a little bit later. This map analysis is not going to be particularly positive, but I still encourage you to take a listen. I'll be showing off some utility ideas and some strategies that you might be able to use should you decide to give the map a try in matchmaking. But suffice it to say, the map is not really in a grand state right now. This is, of course, the launch version of the map. I do expect some changes to be made. Valve likes to do those sort of slow but steady iterations onto a map. Sometimes not so slow, as they showed with Vertigo, where they basically overreacted to every single stat that they got after every single change. Presumably because it was also an active duty map during that time. So we can only hope for a more protracted development time for this particular map, and also hope that it doesn't die like Canals did. But time will tell all things. For now, we're going to take a look at this map. Remember that this map, well, I guess news if you didn't know, this map was originally supposed to be an Aztec remake, but ultimately didn't end up happening. I think the main reason for that is probably due to the layout being so drastically different, or maybe it was a decision a little bit earlier on, but the game files still reference Aztec, so we can sort of surmise based on that the assets were not originally added for an original map's purpose. So maybe that was just a code name of the map before it was named. Maybe you could accuse somebody of reading a little bit too far into that detail by saying that it was definitively an Aztec remake, but it would seem a little odd to call it like High Definition Aztec or whatever they called it if it wasn't for that. The first thing that I do want to point out is the sort of thought process behind always trying to pick a T-side approach when you're coming into a new map, because this is something that I haven't really talked about that much in the actual map analysis videos themselves. It's been discussed on some streams, but it bears repeating here. If you're going to try to learn a map, pick T-side. And the reason for that is because you're going to be covering more unique ground and learning more unique angles and doing more unique map movements throughout your time on the T side. As a CT, you're going to be rotating through terrain you probably have already explored in some fashion or another, just because that's usually a safer bet. And as a result of that, you're going to learn less about the map. Still an important piece of the map, how to defend, but not the same thing as learning everything about the map, because to some extent you still need to be able to be aggressive on the CT side on most maps, and this map is no exception to that. So you are eventually going to need to be able to figure out what exactly is going on the T side, or the sort of more neutral territory that is generally going to be more on the T side of things, just in a pure heat map sense. That being said, this map does not make it easy for you to start on T side. It sends you a lot of really mixed signals initially. Not the least of which is the fact that all of this terrain that you see over here cannot actually be interacted with. It seems like I should be able to jump up here because it's not at a ridiculous height level. It's a nice 2D fucking plains for the water, but it's not at a ridiculous height level. The same thing is over here. This is a point that I made on my recent map analysis stream. The other thing is, of course, I don't know if you're able to hear that, but the soundscapes change very intensely as you move through the map, which, certainly could be addressed with time, and I would expect it to be. But when it comes to this, you can't even use these for like saving or off angles or lurking. And I understand that maybe you want to make the map a little bit more on the simpler side for the geometry's sake, although I wouldn't necessarily agree with that as a design decision, but I understand maybe that could be the reason. But this map doesn't, like, opening this area up for verticality's sake and for having more angles to save from and all that, it doesn't really allow you to any real safe camping spots. I guess in theory you might be able to like position yourself in a really like fuck you position over here or something. But you could, just allow it, wall this sort of area off and allow from here to here as just one example. And then you can, cross this bridge that you've always dreamed of crossing. I'm sure as soon as anybody looked at this bridge, they were like, oh yeah, it's going to be epic to cross that. Well, you can't. It's not allowed. Big Daddy Valve says no. And I don't like it when Daddy says no. So I'm just sort of imploring Valve to not say no and to say yes instead. I think at this point, it's just something that you should be able to expect, is that if there's cover or terrain or anything like that that you can interact with in theory just by jumping, that's sort of ingrained in our heads that we should be able to jump there. I mean, think of all of the things that in any other game in Counter-Strike you wouldn't be able to interact with, but because you can reach it by virtue of jumping or jumping from some point to another, you can interact with it. I mean, I'm thinking like all of the spots on A-site cache where you can jump onto those like headlights or whatever, or the obvious mid run boost, or not really run boost, but it's like if you hit the long jump hop or whatever, you can manage to go from CT side mid to the boost spot. That's an area where on any other game you just wouldn't have that functionality in theory. Just because like the games that have more movement speed than CS, like Quake or whatever, don't have that like small, fine, really minor details. And obviously when it comes to other games that don't have the same movement speed or movement capabilities as CS, you don't have the ability to make the jumps that you have the ability to make in this game. So it's just something that we're used to playing CS maps. I know I gave a sample size of 1 as my example with Cache, but there's so many different examples, like all the boost spots in Inferno and stuff, that you don't really get the opportunity to engage with in this area, which just feels a little lame. And because it sends you that initial mixed signal of, you should be able to jump here, but you can't. I mean, for one, I think it leads to less strategic diversity when it comes to making your pathing as optimal as possible for specific timings. But another thing that it sort of does on a more subliminal level is it maybe encourages you to think outside the box a little bit less often. And that to me is the real shame. Now, obviously it's speculation, but I would just say it would feel a lot better if we didn't have to deal with that. So we have escaped the insect noises by going into this B-side tunnel. I just want to point out that I think long corridors like this, I mean, it's very common in this particular map, but I don't think it lends very well to Counter-Strike's gameplay. I think if you're going to have corridors, you need to have them be open enough, split enough, and generally speaking, minimal enough, such that they don't feel like they're a repetitive theme or something that repeatedly happens. Another thing to point out is that the map obviously has been painstakingly detailed to the point where it's not fully optimized just yet, and actually trying to no-clip through the terrain will just hit you all the time, which is pretty unfortunate for map analysis, but obviously it doesn't really impact the main game. That being said, the texture quality is kind of low, so if you stop to look at anything, the illusion dies very quickly. I'm not sure how many people who are going to play on this map care that much about visuals and also have their visuals cranked to the max in terms of max settings. I have max settings besides anti-aliasing, which obviously doesn't do anything to texture quality when inspecting it up close, like over here. But this is where things go back to like Bubsy 3D level, and this is where it becomes very obvious that this is a game made in 2012 and not a game made in 2020. But they did do their damnedest to, at least on a surface level, make the map look a little bit more appealing, which I think should be recognized. It's almost like we would expect that. I mean, it's just how things are now, so I understand why they did do it. And I wanted to call special attention to this crate, which doesn't really feel like it belongs here, but you will wish that there were more of them throughout this map, because there's very little cover of this height level or anywhere in that neighborhood that you can play around certain angles with. And you can't really play around this anyway that much. I mean, you can sort of crouch jump and hold for an aggression, but compare this sort of cover or this sort of architecture to like Mirage A-site entrance, the T-side ramp entrance there, where there's so many different areas that you can sort of post up on and hold for CT aggression if that's what you're worried about. Yeah, this is a poor man's replacement for that, that's for sure. So that's just like one example where it doesn't really add up to me. Coming into the B site approach from the T side, there's a couple of different things that you can do. This whole right side area is basically just a lurk position, I suppose. There's not really any utility to doing it. You can't even use this as an area for you to wallbang through. As you can see, when I come over to the other side, there's no trace of my bullets. And as a result of that, I think it's rather unfortunate inclusion. I'm not even really sure why this sort of cubby area exists on this side. Maybe other than to block vision, because I have found out that when I was trying to do like a 3-man boost sack earlier, you can't actually do that. This pale blocks a line of sight into wrap on the CT side for the defenders, which is like further up over there. It's this thing that we're looking at over here, this area. So as a result of that, like, it's very clear that this is a deliberate decision by Valve to block pathing and or block viewing, so that you can't actually engage with the map via boosts. I'm not really sure why they would try to minimize that as much as possible. It feels like maybe a poor man's solution to a problem of the Ts having too much strategic diversity and the CTs having too little, which we will get into a little bit later on. You can line yourself up for a pretty easy smoke if you just sort of stick yourself to the left coming out of there, You can throw a smoke. That one went a little bit too far back, actually, but if you throw it a little bit to the left of that, there's a super easy smoke to essentially block the main line of sight for the CTs. So it's sort of supposed to land about here. And when it does, you basically have free reign to take the site itself. You can do like a very easy run throw, which will sort of Molotov out the cubby area. It should ideally go a little bit deeper, but as you can see, it's still going there in that example. And with this smoked and you hugging this right side, there's no chance for any sort of reprisal unless somebody's playing around the pillar, which is actually quite likely in my experience. So what I would recommend you doing as a T, trying to take this area, is have your first entry charging up, hugging the right, and as he's doing so, right, like just to go back a little bit, you're going to come out of the door, you're going to come over here. The only way that they can hit you from wrap is if they're boosted, so you don't have to worry about that line of sight. And as you're coming up, you know, you try to get that smoke thrown so that you don't have to deal with this angle, but you can also just take this fight as your entry and have your second man like maybe holding over here for a push from wrap while your first man in holds for that angle. And the more you get over here, the sort of more you're isolating individual angles. Like now over here, the only threat that I'm at is if somebody really deep pushes, and then I can wide swing on the guy from CT spawn, I can wide swing on a wrapper, I can wide swing even on somebody who's like coming out from the pillar area. They're all pretty much localized into this sort of 45-degree arc, if it's even that. I think it's more like a 30-degree arc. So as we're coming out here, this is where things get a little bit testy. Obviously, you're going to want this area smoked off like it was before. And as you're doing that, you're going to come out here and isolate this angle against the guy playing pillar on the right side, on your right side, his left side. You're going to come out here and take a look at this angle, and then you're going to come out here and take a look at cubby, which we had Molotoved earlier. Now, if this is smoked and you've isolated this and your second man is watching for a wrap push, this is where you can line up the Molotov. I think you'd probably want to aim like halfway up the third brick there, the third from the top, and start running. And then in theory, that would take care of things. Of course, if you wanted it to go a little bit deeper, you could aim at the fourth brick, I think, and run for a little bit longer. And that will definitely flush him out. So really it depends on how far forward you want to go, because if your second man in is like maybe standing over there, you can manage to do that without obscuring his line of sight onto the wrap. And the wrap is where I would imagine the Opera would play most, but maybe a rifler would actually be better, just purely because if you're worried about wrap, you could just smoke this off with another smoke. Like, we're assuming you can just sort of like half-buy onto this site pretty much anytime you want, just based on the fact that I mean, that's a really specific smoke, but just based on the fact that you only need one smoke, maybe one flash to pop out of here to make sure that if they are boosted, you can evade that. So this would be like the A-long Dust 2 flash. You throw a flash over the doors. As you're coming out, that flashes anybody who's boosted. Then you get into position to throw the smoke, which you can do very, very safely. I would imagine it would be something like aiming... Well, I don't know. You could probably just aim at this crack over here, to be honest, but I'm not sure. And you'd figure out some smoke lineup. That goes too far, but whatever. And you'd smoke off the wrap, and then you could smoke off the CT side area, and then clear this angle and Molotov out cubby. And as you can see, all of the angles we're dealing with here, there's pretty much no fallback potential. Like, you think you can fall back from CT side? Well, you can, but you're completely ineffective. Like, as soon as this smoke goes down over here, if you're CT side, you're fucked. You have to push this, in which case, obviously, you're very vulnerable coming out of it if they have any angles set up. Or you have to wait for the smoke to clear and, like, try to throw flashes over. You can't boost over this area. Like, the lines, the cover is, like, giant walls. It's very much, that's why I say it's like a 2015 map. It doesn't feel like, it feels like it was made in a vacuum without acknowledging the fact that boosts are a thing, that like different wall bangs and utility and stuff are a thing. There are some obvious spam potential areas, like this area right here is very clearly like you'd plant the bomb and then you'd ping it and then you just wall bang when they defuse. By the way, you can ping now. I don't know if you knew that. And that's an obvious case where if you're a T, you can re-peek once it's planted. Maybe that would end up being a default plant like all along this line, so you could do that, which means you are liable to get pre-fired from somebody within this area. But that's like a sort of a guessing game. Like, you might even just want to give up that opportunity and plant safe, for lack of a better term, once you've secured the site. And this would be like the safe plant with these two smokes still up and the Molotov to cubby and all that stuff. Like, I don't see a world where CTs can guarantee impact despite the fact that they are in this sort of connector area. Like one of them would be here, one of them might be wrap, one of them might be on the CT position. And that's assuming you've got 3 people B, which you might actually want to default to all the time after the Ts realize that they can do that every single time. As you can see here, it's very difficult to throw a grenade through here. I don't even know if it's possible, to be completely honest. I think I did one by chance a while ago. I think maybe you would have to do something like that. Yeah, so that one, so you can throw the grenade specifically through here. There's like a little exit over there. Although I'm not sure if a flashbang would actually do anything. Because, yeah, it just ends up falling over there. So I guess in theory you can throw a grenade through the... It's actually hard for me to see where they are. So you can throw a grenade through that, and that will land and Molotov the a default plant spot if you wanted to deny it or to do something else. I'm not sure if you can throw a grenade and have it detonate and have it do damage. Like, let's see. Oh, that one actually went all the way through somehow. So yeah, actually, if you can find that lineup again, because I'm sure that's very, very specific. It looks like you're aiming to the bottom of this little, the second from the top bar. But I'm not sure. Yeah, that's like a little bit to the left, and it's completely different. So obviously, it's very, very, very specific. Good luck actually hitting that. This is all 128 tick for the record. There's really not that many opportunities for you, I don't think, to actually do anything here. You can't even boost and see over here, because as you see here, this is like about where you might be boosted at, because you can't uncrouch as the guy who's boosting as a second part of the tower, and you're super spammable. So it's not even like overpass A site coming up from the stairs and boosting over that very spammable fence by dumpster. You can't even do something like that where you could just be spammed on. Like, there's very little options for a tactical-based team to do anything here. You're basically just stuck playing retakes, and they added a dedicated mode for that, so I don't know why they thought that they would need to make a whole map around that. There's the obvious joke. There it is. This is the sort of other area that you can go to if you want to go from T-spawn to B. And this is where, if you have your first and second entry going into the B site from the regular spot, you can have your third man in sort of covering an angle like this. And once the smokes go through, he can start to like move himself through. There's an obvious angle over here where maybe you actually want your opera over here holding this line of sight. But you could easily just get pre-fired, obviously, if you can stutter step, which I clearly cannot right now. I don't know why I don't have any hands today, but there you go. Only took me a little bit. So you could stutter step that. I'm not actually even sure if that's the right line of sight, but that looks to be about head height. So that's probably where you'd want to pre-aim, which makes sense. And then, aside from that, I mean, I'm not sure there's really anything that you can do, because even this crate, you need to be boosted onto, it looks like. So, and you can't move, like, behind it or anything. You can't... Forget about using anything for cover in this map. Let's be real. That's not something Valve believes in, clearly. So if we were to make some sort of determination about this bomb site, not really a lot of flexibility for the CTs once the Ts exec onto it. Not very difficult for the Ts to exec onto it. Also, because there's so few spots for the CTs to go, that means that there's so few spots for the Ts to bother using utility on or clearing, which actually just makes it objectively less interesting. Because you've taken away, well, you haven't really taken anything away. You haven't provided sufficient opportunities for the CTs to take aggressive postures, defensive postures, different tactical setups. Like, think of all of the different setups that you might see a pro team in CSGO run on the CT side, especially in a world where the pro teams are really, really effective at managing their economy, such that you are basically in danger of getting money fucked unless you've chained through like 3, 4, 5 CT rounds without losing sufficient numbers of players. So CTs need to be on top of their game, and there's going to be tons of value added to getting a really solid line of scrimmage set up. As a result of that, you're going to see a lot of innovation in that respect, but there's not even room for that much innovation here, and I fully admit that it sounds a little crazy to say that, given that the map is just a couple days old now at this point when the video goes live. So bearing that in mind, I think it's important to consider that there's not a whole lot of potential for them to significantly improve the tactical options of this map without significantly reworking a large portion of the sites, which they may very well do. But I fail to see why you had to get it to this position of this level of quality. I don't understand why you had to start here and then work your way from there. Like, it feels like maybe this is a gray box or something, but you had a full art pass. So it takes a long time to art a level. And it's pretty ridiculous to think that that would have to happen for, this particular case. So the idea that the Ts and CTs both are very limited on strategic, like essentially like what their tactics can actually be, what their playbook can be. You can't have a deep playbook on this map just based on that. And again, I've only shown off B. I'll show off the rest of the map, but it doesn't fare any better. The B bomb site does not really facilitate a large amount of diversity. You look at any other map, even any of the other maps that have been added to this particular operation. The only other diffuse map that was added was Engage. It's a great map in terms of the sort of diversity of plays that can be made. It does have some issues with utility. I went over that very recently in my map analysis stream. I do think people wrote it off a little bit too early when it comes to the verticality aspect of it. I think that's something that that map will essentially have as its calling card, and you'll just learn about it. But I do think that there need to be more utility options, more tactical options, essentially. But you can still have a much deeper playbook for that map compared to this map. There's really not that much that you can do. Oh, you can send one guy into the little construction area, and he can flank while your entry pack moves up, and the other two players can go mid and either join up from the T entrance or try to split from mid into CT spawn. That's pretty, like, that's your strat. Like, you decide how many people are going through the T entrance, basically. How many people are going through the T side entrance? Is it 2, 3, 4, or all 5? And you've got one guy coming over here. You kind of have to have one guy coming over here, but I guess a full-on rush could, in theory, work if you throw down some utility to slow people down from rotating through mid, because you can rotate through mid as a CT, and especially if it gets called as a B rush, that could very easily influence some rotations. But, I mean, aside from throwing down a smoke or a Molotov or whatever at that particular angle, as you're coming up, yeah, I think it would always make sense to, at least, like, if you're going to be full-on rushing B, you want to throw a smoke over here to make people think twice about pushing. So, like, as they're coming out over here, they're going to be like, oh, shit, this is smoked. Somebody could be anywhere. So that's something that you could easily do. There's actually a lot of potential to play around this kind of cover, but even then, it's like you're just turning corners. There's, like, one and done position. Okay. Like, I could trade over here. One and done position. One and done position, one and done position, one and done position. Like, there's so many of those all over the map. And so it's actually, like, even though the layout is pretty simple, the cover itself that does exist is really confusing in a lot of areas. Like, the angles are kind of confusing because of their number. So overwhelming, I guess, would be a better term. And then aside from that, you've got to deal with the fact that there's a large number of angles to clear for CTs rotating through, but those angles cannot be accessed by the CTs due to timings to, take advantage of it against Ts. So the only way that Ts could get these angles used against them is if the Ts were slow or made some other sort of grand strategy mistake. And otherwise, you don't have to worry about that at all as a T. So that's the B site. I'm not a fan. We'll move on to A, and then we'll go to mid. Mid is actually pretty important in this map. If you don't plan on going B. And that's about it. That's the only time it's important. I just got stuck trying to move. Let's see if we can replicate that. Yep. All right, well, there's some clipping needs to be done over there. Nice little scene over here. Lighting is fucked over here, but whatever. So this is the main approach to A. This is basically like a poor man's version of Santorini's approach to the B-bomb site on the T side, where you can hang right or hang left, but they're straight on angles. This one will give you a line of sight onto the bombs. Well, not really the bomb site itself, but pretty close to the bomb site. Whereas this is the one that you're going to go for a rush and like throw utility through. Don't let these little cracks fool you. You're not able to actually throw grenades through that. You might be able to break the server or something. That's about it, though. So you're going to want to like throw some flashes through. This is like your... another thing that this could be sort of paralleled to is the Mirage B-Apps waterfall out strat, where you're like throwing flashes off the walls and stuff. But that's pretty much it. Like, even then... So the second pathway doesn't really add that much. What I would suggest, for example, is like taking this waterfall area and actually allowing it to be pathed up and making it more smooth, so they just have more rocks or whatever. I guess, and have it be a more smooth pathway. And then you can take a right and move towards A from there and have that be a more straightforward element. And like maybe close this off because there's not really that much value of taking a left here or taking a right here and then a left here. This is only really more of a headache for any CTs that push out. The fact that this little pillar exists. And this pillar also blocks vision of the A and B information sites as you're coming out. So as a new player, this is another thing where it's like, I'm not sure if I know where to go on this map. I mean, I guess you are walking past an A one, but the idea that there's an A and B one right here and that you can't even fully see them because of this, it's like, what? Why is this even here? It seems like maybe they didn't think that was going to be that big of a deal, and maybe it isn't that big of a deal, but it sure seems very confusing. And that's pretty... I just feel like that's unfortunate going into this map is like, as a newer player, I don't fully understand why they made that decision. But anyway, the idea that you could potentially come out through, you could walk out over here. I mean, for one, it gives you an elevated line of sight position, and it's a little bit longer to reach and a longer overall pathway. But if it's separated out by this, so that the only other entrance is essentially like a B rotation, or a mid to A rotation rather. I saw B because I saw the site there. But if we come out over here to mid, like this is the T side of mid, and you can imagine a CT pushing out, and if this whole area is sealed off, then as the CT is pushing out, all they have to worry about is like, I guess here, or here. And those are the only two angles that they have to worry about, and odds are there's not going to be a lurker all the way in spawn by the time that the CT is pushed up over here. By the way, the fact that there are 3 angles that you have to clear when you come out here as a CT means you never want to push out here early. Like, it's such a fucking insane angle to try to clear, for me anyway, coming out here. It's like, oh yeah, I've got to clear this, and then that, and then that. Okay, yeah, how about I just sit back and pick my dick until the enemies show up on the spawns? Just doesn't make any sense to me that they would do something like that. And the same is true for over here. This is like a lurker's paradise over here because you can just sort of sit here and wait for some footsteps to be heard as a CT or as a T lurking after a bomb plant. Like if you take A through mid, your T exec would basically look like somebody finding a smoke lineup for this mid area. And, well, that's obviously went too high. But you find a smoke for that mid area. It's a very tight choke point, so as soon as you smoke it off, especially if you're able to smoke it off like right here, at the front, you don't have to worry about anybody holding an angle with an op or a rifle from that position. Actually, a smoke like this would potentially be useful for the one-and-done position that is this abomination. I don't know why this exists. You can't even boost up to... Well, I guess in theory you could boost up to get up here, but I don't know why you would ever have 2 CTs in that position. So that's like a hilarious angle to take. But if you smoke off the top mid area as a T, you can then decide to split over towards the A-bomb site, or you can basically just decide to safely cross over here, in theory, with like one flashbang to clear out anybody who's holding here or here. And I think that one flashbang is pretty easy to like approximate, because it's... Okay, well, I guess you need to find a little bit of a smarter one, but... In theory, it's not too difficult to do. You could probably even get somebody to throw it for you through spawn. So your A take would look like taking that and then trying to rotate over here. And then if you can leave one guy here or just have him come back after the site is taken, super, super strong position for you. Because look at what the CTs can do. The CTs can hold behind this box and then fall back all the way to spawn and cry. The CTs can try to meet you over here, but this is about the timing. Like, you're going to be taking a fight like... I think the T's are going to be like at this area over here, which is a crazy fucking angle for you to try to hit, especially when you're learning the map as a CT. So you're going to be like trying to play a headshot angle over here where they can see a lot more of you. And then on top of that, like, okay, there's some off angles you can play. You can't jump over here, which is more of that T-spawn syndrome where they just don't allow you to jump onto stuff that appears like you should be able to. So you can't even like use that one and done position. You can only use other one and done positions that are Valve approved. And then after that, it's just a situation where, like, okay, you might be able to play for info, see if they're rushing, and then fall back. Okay, you can do that. And then you can come behind this box. And this is the only piece of cover that you can play around in the entire site, pretty much. Because when you're coming out here, it's like, okay, I have a line of sight into the right side, but I could easily be flashed out. I could just be smoked off. Like, somebody could find some sort of lineup from this right side where there's no way for me to answer to them, and they can like find a smoke that will smoke my position off. So now I can't see anything. I have to wrap all the way around and expose myself to the whole tunnel, or I have to go left and hope that I don't get, like, just play around the left side and hope I don't get flashed or something. Like, there's a couple of different things that can happen there, where even though they can't throw flashes over, I mean, I'm assuming they can't. Oh, they might actually be able to. Oh, baby, you can. Okay, so if I'm holding this tunnel, I can get flashed. I'm holding it here. Flashed. Well, sort of flashed. It's like a micro flash. It's a full flash, depending on where you are, and depending on how far it's thrown. But if you're at this box, you're kind of fucked. So you have to fall back over here. But the whole time you're at this box, by the way, you're also exposed to mid. So if you lose mid control, you have to be constantly worried about this. So that's why it's really important to take mid control as a T, where obviously it doesn't matter for B because you have dominance over the side with like 2 grenades. Whereas over on A, you do need a little bit more of an investment. But it's still good for conditioning, obviously, as Vertigo has taught us. So then you can fall back to this position, and you can take this angle, which you can obviously very easily be flashed off of, or, you know, somebody can find a smoke grenade lineup from right outside here. In theory, they can find something that does like this. I'll aim to the sort of meeting point over there. So that will smoke off the wrap. I guess you could throw a Molotov from at the same angle, so you could throw that smoke, and then you could throw this Molotov. And this will force you off to the left, and then you are stuck in an even more compromised position. So notably, as the T's are taking more control, I'm assuming you have space for one guy. That's it. You have space for one guy here, and maybe like one guy trying to push out here. But if this position gets compromised or just smoked off, or it's compromised from behind, again, mid control is important. Like, what do you do? Where do you retreat to? Because at this point, you've lost the site control, mid, and there's no other angle into the bomb site besides through CT, which the T's can also abuse through mid. Because if you don't decide to go through the little fucking lurk palace over there, you can decide to go up through the top mid area if you can pick off their sniper. And this whole area is so confusing for me, by the way, just because it's a series of rooms that look identical besides a little bit of lighting touches here and there. And the whole map doesn't really look unique from position to position. But because the CT rotation to B is so straightforward with no other option for them, unless they go mid and take T control, like T mid control, because of this angle right here, like, you could just smoke this off, right? And I guess it would be something like that. You smoke that off, and then just walk forward into CT spawn, and suddenly here you are. Take a look. So that's what you can do with mid control as a T. You obviously can't leverage mid control to go B in any different way than you're already going, which is another example of the map, I think, not having that much strategic diversity. Like, if we consider the idea that you're going to come into this map and you're going to think, what do I want to do with this map? I want to take B. Like, again, your options are going from T-spawn, faking mid control, faking A control, but going for T-spawn. And then, like, by the time you were to ever secure CT spawn, the round is probably over. So you would have to go through the T-spawn entrance, through the double doors over there, and then you'd like send one guy here, 2 guys over there, and then the rest of them wherever they want to go, basically. And so your default would probably look like that, where your opper and a supportive player would go through mid, I guess, or your opper would try to hold A and one player would go mid. I don't know. You wouldn't really want to send only one player mid, I think, but the idea is still there. So, like, you can't realistically leverage mid control to split B unless you invest a smoke for spawn, and I just don't see a world where it would be required, is what I'm getting at. Like, I guess you can stymie a retake attempt, but what can they really do for retakes? Like, okay, I'm a CT and I want to retake the B bomb site. So what do? I'll try to find a lineup for the T ramp position. So we're going to throw it to the point where those 2 bows meet. And I'm not really anywhere in particular. I guess I'm lined up with that. So what does that do? Okay, that will smoke that off. And then I'll line up over... Well, I still want to be safe, right? So again, that was a lineup for right here. So I aim at this, and then I aim at the where those bows meet together, the sort of like fork there. Okay, so I've smoked that off, and now I will. I mean, I guess I flash and a hard clear cubby, or instead of smoking that position that I was just smoking, I can smoke cubby, and then a hard clear. Well, I mean, I guess in theory you can just smoke the whole thing off, but a little bit further so you can like work it through. I don't know. Like, again, I don't know what you smoke in this case. I guess you would want a Molotov cubby, smoke T, and then like flash over this crypt area or whatever this is, right? So you'd like flash over the site, and then you'd try to come out with that. But you can't really help anybody who is... I mean, I guess you could probably find like a running lineup that would flash construction, but you can't help your teammate if he's going through B. The best you can do is maybe flash over the site or try to like isolate an angle for him. Yeah, I don't even... Like, again, I'm really at a loss for what impactful utility you can have. So I think anything that you do can also be used against you. Or it can just not be very effective, right? Like, if it can't be used against you, it's also not going to help you out that much. So that's why the B-bomb site is really, really bad for CTs. But it's also not really interesting for Ts. It's just like, it's sort of like vertigo syndrome. You take it because it's the percentage play, not because it's fun. Or there's like an engaging aspect to it, right? Whereas if we look at this site, I don't know why you would want to go here as a T. But even if you do want to go here, you have to go through way more steps. But even then, if you are able to take control, the CTs can do nothing. Like, I guess the CTs might have a little bit more useful utility to throw. Like, they might be able to isolate two smokes that will smoke off the right side over here. I guess ideally it would be like here and here. So that they would be able to isolate just the bomb site, and then they could come in from spawn. If you have two people and you know some lineups for that, like that could be possible. So you could do something like, again, you're really exposed to a deep line of sight there. But you could come into this corner. We'll try that jump throw. Yeah, it went a little bit too low. But whatever, I guess that could in theory be useful as well. Not really. We'll aim at the top right, see if that goes. Nope. And then that goes too deep. So yeah, I'm not really sure what your lineup would be, but you'd try to smoke off like here and here. So like a wall of smokes, ideally with no gap on the right over there. And then afterward, I mean, again, I'm not even sure if it's possible. Like, you might actually have to leave a gap. But you'd find some sort of lineup to do that. Maybe you could just smoke this as a poor man's version of that and enter in through T and like throw a Molotov behind the box. Clear that. Clear this. But again, like, you have to invest a lot more into the retake utility-wise than it looks like. And you also need to leverage positions. If you only have CT spawn because you lost mid and you lost the choke point on the site, and it's not really that easy to hold on to those positions. Like, if you know an A hit is coming, it's much easier to prepare for it, obviously, but because you have such a strong take as a T on B site, good luck as a CT not holding like 2 or 3 B. With like a lean towards B, I guess. So 2B and then a lean towards B. But that means you only have 2 on A site. And I guess you'd have like 1 in Lurk Temple, and then 1 in over here by the tunnels. So I think that's pretty much it. I can't imagine a world where this map would end up being very strategically deep or tactically deep. I would much rather see... I mean, I would rather see some community maps, obviously. Like, I think Iris... People think that Engage is too much. Go play Iris. I'll link it in the description. It's a great map. It's made by Bubkiz as well, you know, as Oliver did the art for it. But Bubkiz did the layout just like Engage, just like Mirage. So you can check that out. Like, it's reputable names. It's much more conventional with the way that it's constructed than Engage's, but it still allows such a much higher level of mastery and tactical depth, and you can have a deep playbook on that map, and you can find lineups that aren't like one and done, and there's cover to play around. Like, that's an example of a map that's simple in terms of its initial construction, that allows you to very like intuitively understand where things are. You don't have to worry about it to the same degree as Engage, I guess, by that metric. There's more tactical depth because there's more utility options. So, like, that's a map that is competitive ready. I don't even have to say it needs changes. You could actually just play that map in the pro play competitive ladder right now, active duty, get better games on it than Vertigo. So that's my hot take. My other hot take is that this map not too great, and maybe Valve will make a lot of changes to it, or maybe they'll canals it. I don't know, but for a map that didn't have to be restricted to the same degree that Canals did, because it didn't have to seem like a one-to-one recreation of another real-life location, you could have really dipped into the fantasy of this and made it a lot more interesting, a lot more majestic, but also just a lot more deep tactically. And I'm kind of surprised that they didn't. I mean, for all its faults, the initial Aztec still allowed you to do a lot of different things on it. Maybe too many different things. But I would actually much rather have too many options than too few, even though both are not really great. You want to hit some sort of Goldilocks zone there. This is not cutting it, though. So that's my analysis of, I almost said Aztec, Ancient by Valve. Hopefully they improve the map, and also hopefully they don't stick us with it, because that would be a shame if they did that. So yeah, see you guys playing Engage in matchmaking eventually. Check it out. Bye.